Summertime is drawing to a close here in Michigan. School has started, and the project of redoing the fish barn is nearing completion. Over the past few months, many of the tanks in the fish barn have experienced some significant changes. So it's about time we dive into the fish barn and start looking at some fish tanks again. So I want to show you my 5 favorite tanks here in the fish tank barn, and I'm curious which one's your favorite. Go ahead and leave that in the comments section. So let's dive into the barn and start looking at some tanks. The first tank that I want to show you is my 125-gallon Mbuna tank. This tank is home to a large group of purple ACI and yellow lab cichlids. You'll also see a random German blue peacock in this tank as well. Like most of the tanks you'll see in this video, I made a DIY spray foam background for this tank, and if you want to learn more about how I did that, go ahead and check out the link above. I've aquascaped this tank with coral rock that I had from old reef setups, as well as some rocks that I found locally as well with my kids. For substrate, I used black sandblasting sand that I found at Menards. I found that this sand has worked out okay, but it does compact a little bit too much for my liking. But for $8 for a 50-pound bag, I really can't complain too much. For lighting, I used 2 Aquaneat strip lights, which I found has done fine for lighting this tank. You'll also notice some live plants in this tank, and the Vallisneria that you see in here has always done well with my Mbuna. They may dig it up a little bit, but once it gets established, they seem to leave it alone. I also use an AquaClear hang-on back filter, which has done a fine job with keeping this tank clean. Along with the bright colors, what really sets this tank apart is the constant action of the fish darting in and out of the rockwork. This tank is really fun at feeding time, with the fish jockeying for position and almost jumping out of the tank. So let's sit back and enjoy the show. So let's head now to what I think is one of the classic tanks in the fish tank barn, the 245-gallon South American tank. I've had this tank set up for a couple of years now, and the fish have really matured. This was the first tank that I used my DIY background, and has held up well. This tank has seen some aquascaping changes since the last time you've seen it, and other than that, it's pretty much unchanged. In comparison to the African cichlid tank that's across from it, the fish that are in this tank are pretty mellow. First of all are these wild-caught severums from the Rio Nene in Peru that I picked up in Chicago from Pleco Paradise. These fish have actually spawned a couple of times in the fish barn, but I've never seen any fry. We also have 2 different groups of geophagus. The first is the Geophagus altifrons, which I've had in the fish room since 2018. I really have enjoyed these fish. They have grown up quite nicely, and it's really exciting to see their large streamers. I actually took one of these fish to New Jersey in 2019 to the cichlid show at the Aquatic Experience. There's also some Geophagus heckelii in here that I won from Dan's Fish when they were fry. These fish have grown up quite nicely and are a really great addition to this tank as well, and being a more mid-water swimmer than the altifrons that we spoke about earlier. Finally, there's this Mesoheros atromaculatus, which I picked up at the Big Fish Deal auction in 2020. Since this fish is related to the Festae, I was worried about it being aggressive, but this fish has been a model citizen in its time here in the fish barn. I really do want to get some sort of schooling fish in this tank, like either some larger monk tetra type species or even some Dennis's barbs. Let me know in the comment section what you think would be a great addition to this tank. I've been lighting this tank with some LED shop lights that I have inside of a gutter for a reflector, and that's worked quite well. This tank is filtered with a sump, which I found to work quite well. I really do enjoy the chill vibe of this tank in comparison to the African cichlid tanks we just saw. It has kind of a yin and yang effect with the two tanks as you walk into the fish room. This next tank we're going to look at has had quite an evolution. This tank originally started out as a 20-gallon long and has now developed into this 75-gallon tank with a stop as a 40 breeder in between. This is another tank with the DIY background and is aquascaped with wood, dragonstone, and is home to a large amount of Java moss as well as an assortment of other plants. This tank is home to a good variety of livebearers, starting out with the Antinobius toweri, or blue-tailed gadaeid. Hailing from Mexico, I find the males of this fish to be quite stunning with its silver body and blue tail. There's also a group of sunset variatus platies, which I think are one of the more stunning beginner fish in the aquarium hobby. Rounding out the livebearers are these mud endlers, which, while not purebred, do put out some very stunning fish. There's also a group of Pseudomagil luminatus in this tank, which at first were kind of boring, but with a little patience have actually become quite stunning, and are quickly becoming a favorite here in the fish room. While this tank has the jungle look, I would say this is my best aquascaping job here in the fish barn. I run this tank very simply from a lighting and filtration perspective, using a Fennec Stingray light and an Aquarium Co-op sponge filter. This is another tank that I just enjoy sitting and watching the fish. The movement of the fish, coupled with the beauty of the plant and aquascape, what I think make this tank outstanding. Tropheus have been one of my favorites for quite a long time, and last year at the Big Fish Deal, I was able to pick up this group of beautiful Tropheus red bemba. These fish have done quite well for me, producing quite a few fry. This 90-gallon is a rather simple setup with sand, some reef rock, and a Seachem Tidal 55 for a hang-on back filter. While this tank is rather simple, what makes it stand apart is the fish. I really enjoy watching the color of the Tropheus and their behavior swimming in and out of the rockwork. And what I think really makes this tank stand out is the ability to have a species-only tank that is not only functional when it comes to breeding the Tropheus, as well as beautiful in terms of the design and the interaction of the fish. So we're going to stay with Lake Tanganyika and look at this 150-gallon Lake Tanganyika Community tank. However, this tank does have a little bit of a twist. This tank is aquascaped with a mix of reef rock and some cichlid stones that I picked up at a local swap. Fish-wise, this tank is home to a group of Cyprichromis, Leptosoma, Yellowhead, and Conde, which I've had for about a year, and also some Callichromis Pellerspillis Flame Rainbow, which I picked up a few months ago. These fish have grown up quite nicely and starting to show a little bit of color on their fins, and I'm really excited to see how this fish develops into the future. So now let's talk about the twist, this group of Melanitania species Goiter River. I got these fish around the 4th of July of 2020 from Jimmy from Aquarium Co-op. These fish have done quite well since coming into the fish barn and are getting along well with their Tanganyikan tank mates. Though this is not a setup I would recommend, it does seem to be working out quite well. This tank is planted with some Vallisneria and also has some hornwood on the top to offer cover for any spawning fish or eggs. This tank is filtered with one of the new Emperor 450s, and that seems to be performing quite well. This is definitely a tank that I'm excited about to see these fish grow out and see them color up, and maybe even add a few more additions.